Day 1281 of the Ukrainian war map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzie here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on more than 1,079,000 military personnel losses, representing an additional 880 in the past day. Then as for hardware, 4 tanks, 7 APVs, 40 artillery, 2 rocket launchers, and not 1, but 2 oil refineries. Russia's domestic fuel shortages won't be getting better anytime soon. So direct to the map we go, because overnight, and starting with refinery number 1, the Kubishevsk oil refinery, a good example of a location where you don't need close-up, high-resolution imagery to conclude that this facility will be shut down for quite some time. According to local reports, at least 17 Ukrainian UAVs slammed into the refinery, engulfing the sprawling complex in fire and smoke. Eyewitnesses described dozens of blasts across the site, and for a facility which almost cracks the top 10 in largest refineries in Russia, with a production capacity of almost 9 million tons annually. Footage from the night strike shows entire sections lit up, punctuated by secondary explosions that widened the inferno. Russian state media, unusually candid, admitted production had halted completely. Now, owned by Rosneft, this may just be the most destructive refinery strike in months. Sources say the strike crippled the crude distillation unit of CDU-11, which is the refinery's primary atmospheric distillation unit, completely shutting it down. And with CDU-11's 19,000-ton daily throughput gone, and the smaller CDU-9's 5,000-ton very questionably left unaffected, then it's expected that at least 75 to 80% of this plant's refining capacity has been knocked out. What makes the loss more striking is that Kubishevsk is considered the most technologically advanced facility in Rosneft's Samara group, which also includes 2 more refineries in this region. I'm sure you've heard of them, at least one, Syzran. Now, although Russian state media announced operations were halted at the site, it's believed that due to an earlier strike on August 2nd, that this site was likely already non-operational when Ukrainian drones returned today. The refinery, 800 kilometers from Ukraine, plays a strategic military role, producing jet fuel for Su-27 fighters and Tu-22 bombers, the very aircraft Russia uses to launch cruise missiles at Ukraine, leading to a destruction that directly undermines a stable fuel supply for Russian military operations. Russia will surely have to export its own crude oil to refine and receive back into the country. But even where Russia looks abroad for help, it won't find easy solutions. Only a handful of buyers, say China, India, Turkey, can handle its crude grades, and where they can handle some of the capacity required, they can easily use this to put them in a leveraged position against Russia, a place that the Kremlin does not want to be in for their national security. But that's only half the problem, because there's nuance in global energy markets that takes their toll. Because refining abroad and buying back finished fuel means that Moscow pays whatever the value of the refined crude for what it's worth. In other words, they pay market rates, or just about, for the very automotive gasoline and aviation fuel that its own refineries once supplied at cost. That leaves Russia squeezed on both sides, forcibly selling cheap oil sales on one end and expensive fuel purchases on the other. Oh, Russia, only you could turn energy dominance into a spectacular act of self-sabotage. Next up on the map, refinery number 2 of the night. Because as part of these coordinated series of attacks, Ukrainian unmanned aerial vehicles struck the Afipsky oil refinery in Russia's Krasnodar region, setting the facility alight. The plant, with a processing capacity of about 7 million tons of oil annually, had then become the second Russian refinery struck within the very same morning. Local reports describe drones tearing into the site, with fires breaking out across sections of the complex. Videos shared online show the refinery engulfed in flames and heavy smoke billowing skyward. The Afipsky facility is a significant hub in southern Russia's refining network, handling crude imports and processing for domestic fuel supply. And as of now, it's been 6 months since this refinery was last struck by Ukrainian drones in February of this year. But now, half a year later, it's unlikely that it will get another respite of that length ever again. At least not until Russia comes to the peace negotiating table in a genuine act of good faith. And so overall, for this inclusion of this final overnight site targeted, it now marks the 10th Russian oil refinery strike for the month of August alone, which in fact represents a record for any single month in this war, which is very well aligned with Ukraine's production growth in homegrown long-range UAVs. Also noting that for these overnight strikes alone, just these ones, we're looking at 5 to 6% of Russia's total refined oil outputs removed from operation within a single 90-minute window. So widespread fuel shortages inside Russia are expected to be seen in the days and weeks to follow. But refineries were not the only thing on the menu overnight, as a separate strike lit up Petrov Val in Russia's Volgograd region, where Ukrainian drones went after key railway infrastructure. Reports indicate fires broke out at the town's railway station after a direct hit, and another strike landed on a nearby electrical substation. Petrov Val sits on a junction that feeds into regional rail corridors, being lines Russia depends on to keep supplies moving south towards occupied Ukraine. By targeting both the railway and its supporting power, the AFU's aerial campaign targets transport choke points and puts Moscow's distribution network for its military under sustained pressure. Then next up on the map and nearby to the occupied peninsula, where Ukraine managed to take another bite out of Russia's war machine, only this time at sea. A Russian Boyan M-class missile corvette was forced to abandon its mission in the Azov Sea after a Ukrainian operation crippled it near Temrok Bay. The strike was carried out by Ukraine's defense intelligence, with the special unit known as Primary using a drone to disable the ship's radar before a follow-up attack damaged its hull. The Boyan M is a compact but menacing vessel, just 73 meters long or about 240 feet long, but carries caliber cruise missiles capable of striking deep into Russian territory. By knocking it out of service, it removes a key immediate threat and highlights the reach of Ukraine's own growing naval targeting campaign. Another major blow for the Russian Black Sea Fleet, even when it's tucked away in what it presumes to be safer waters. Then next on the map, and headed much closer to the border hostilities, where Novum Group's Special Forces unit Ballista spotted a Russian BM-21 Grad multiple rocket launcher operating inside the Kursk region. Rather than striking it outright, they laid mines along the road that the launcher was using, effectively turning the Grad's own mobility into a liability. So this kind of operation illustrates the tactical pressure Ukraine is building in the border belt. The BM-21 is an older Soviet design, but still a volume fire weapon that can saturate frontline positions with rockets. And for this case, by laying a trap instead of rushing an engagement, Ukrainian forces not only neutralize the system's threat, but also stretch Russian resources, forcing them to reconsider movement, routes, and convoy security. It effectively becomes a debilitating psyop. Then just across the border, on the edge of occupied Sumy, an airstrike struck the gathering point of Russian assault groups near Yanakivka. Local reports suggest Ukrainian forces targeted the staging area where enemy units were concentrating before being pushed toward the front. By catching them in assembly, the strike disrupted not just manpower but also the tempo of operations Russia has been hoping to rebuild in their lackluster northern sector. Then to head further down on the map, near the Serebryanka location or town in the Donetsk region, with Ukrainian forces once again putting on display how to turn back a Russian push Elements of the 81st Airmobile Brigade engaged a mechanized assault by the Russian 11th Army Corps, striking slightly southeast of the village and into the enemy rear. In the clash, Ukrainian troops destroyed at least one Russian MTLB armored carrier, forcing the rest of the attacking column to pull back. Now, holding ground at Serebryanka matters strategically. The village sits along the contested approaches to the Seversky Donetsk River, a natural barrier Russia has repeatedly tried to force itself on. Each repelled attack here preserves Ukraine's defensive line and further erodes Russia's capacity to mount sustained mechanized pushes in this sector. And next to the area of most intense activity, or for what is usually the case, the Pokrovsk direction, with today the fighting somewhat milder, though one skirmish stood out. A small Ukrainian unit thwarted a Russian infantry push in the area of Shevchenko. 16 occupiers disguised in Ukrainian armed forces colors attempted to advance, but were eliminated before they could achieve any success. And it's not the first time that the Kremlin troops have resorted to this tactic, and it certainly won't be the last. Disguising troops in enemy uniforms or colors is banned under the laws of war, not that Russia thinks twice much about that, and is a sign of growing desperation that Moscow continues to reach for. Ultimately, their efforts lacked success, but it does come as a bit of a dick move. Now to Kherson, where a Ukrainian FPV drone scored an unusual long-range strike in the south, knocking out another Russian BM-21 Grad multiple rocket launcher system near the village of Krasno. The 426th UAS Battalion carried out the operation about 55 kilometers from Ukrainian-held territory. So what makes this case stand out is the distance. A few FPV drones are typically effective within a 20 to potentially 40 kilometer envelope now, but this engagement pushed beyond that expected limit. Whether through UAV mothership signal relays, enhanced control systems, or other tricks up the defender's sleeve, it demonstrates how Ukraine continues to stretch the operational boundaries of cheap disposable drones against high-value Russian assets that probably weren't even expecting it at this range. For Moscow, losing another Grad, a backbone system for saturation shelling, to a relatively inexpensive FPV drone underscores just how fragile its artillery park is becoming under constant pressure from Ukraine's evolving drone warfare. Now, as it so happens, yesterday I showed this image for just a few seconds, the aftermath of a Grad burning on the roadside, filmed from the invader's perspective. At the time, there was no geolocation to confirm where it specifically was, but now that location has been pinned down and matched with the FPV strike footage itself, and where it highlights just how extraordinary the range was. Now to a light touch of Russian economy news to round out the video today, because beyond the stories of, for instance, the Kamaz automotive manufacturer going broke, or Russia's state space agency Roscosmos sliding into financial collapse, or construction company revenues plunging, or even now, farmers are broke, to the point where Moscow is considering a moratorium on agricultural bankruptcies. But beyond all that, where it really hits home for ordinary Russians is in the failure of oil refineries and now military plants failing to pay workers for months on end. One telling example comes from a worker at a military plant in Kaluga, who filmed the outside of his own workplace, asking the Ukrainians to, quote, "Please hit the Typhoon military plant in Kaluga. We haven't been paid salaries for 2 months now," end quote. It's the desperate and disgruntled appeal of a Kaluga resident urging Ukraine to strike the Typhoon plant. The facility specializes in radio electronic systems, communications, radars, electronic intelligence, certain munitions, and also produces components for aircrafts, missiles, missile launchers, and air defense systems. So this handy little bit of facility and geolocation intel delivered free of charge to Ukraine's intelligence directorate comes from the place that you should least expect it. Oh, how the sands of time do shift. Never underestimate a disgruntled employee. So that's it for today, guys. Thanks again for watching. Please continue to like, comment, subscribe, and I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers!